1 minute, Rabbi. Bapak Ibu sekalian, apakah ada yang ingin ditanyakan kepada Rabbi sebelum sesi kita dimulai? Silakan. Bila ada yang ingin ditanyakan. Ada?
Lanjut, More.
Lanjut, Pak Yos. Yang lain, lanjut? Atau ada yang ditanyakan dulu?
Lanjut, More.
Baruch Hashem. Baik, terima kasih feedbacknya juga Pak Johnson. Rabbi, I just ask that there are no questions that needs to be asked before the shiur, so we can continue with your shiur. I just want to say one thing here that may Hashem give us the merit, and the merit of this Torah study together with you will be for our health and will be for the benefit of our country. Definitely.
Amen.
Baruch Hashem.
Most certainly. Well,
Amen.
I can see that you're doing many very important things. And Elisheva contacted me about the publication. So it's also a very important activity that you're doing.
Yes.
So may you be blessed with in your own families and your own lives with health and happiness and be satisfaction from the growth of your children in the right way, and only good things, good livelihood and everything that you require. And thank you for all of your excellent work.
Amen. Todara Rabbi. Happy. And thank you also for your guidance, for your teaching to every one of us here. It's really a treasure for us.
I'm very pleased. We are all learning together.
Yes.
Okay.
Baru kasih Bapak Ibu sekalian, Rabbi tadi memberikan blessingnya kepada kita dan berkata bahwa apa yang kita lakukan di Indonesia ini terkait dengan apa yang Bnei Noah Indonesia lakukan, HaRav lakukan dengan Moraili Sheva kontak ke Rabbi Cowen dan memberikan update apa yang sudah kita lakukan, dan Rabbi Cowen berkata, ya memang saya juga tahu, saya mendapatkan update juga yang sama dari komunitas Bnei Noah Indonesia. Jadi apa yang beliau katakan, kita ini melakukan hal yang penting. Jadi beliau juga memberkati kita untuk kesehatan, untuk parnasa, untuk anak-anak kita, dan biarlah Hashem memberikan kita kekuatan senantiasa untuk terus menjalankan ini sampai dengan selesai, sampai dengan tugas kita selesai. Baruch Hashem. Over to you, Rabbi.
Amen. Good. Okay, now I thought I'd talk a little bit today about the idea of movement in history. In other words, the trend of history. And just like we find that a human being, normally, if a human being is properly directed in their life, they want to serve Hashem, or they want to learn, they want to become better, that we find that people have generally speaking, and their lives get better, their lives improve in the sense that they become more refined. And that's why it's why in Torah it says you should respect an older person. Even if this is not a learned person, you should still respect an older person because of the experience which the person has had. Because of the number of lessons that the person has already learned from life. So similarly, we could say that so long as a human being is well directed in his own her own life, that their life they become more refined as time goes on. Now I want to suggest that in general too, the Torah views history as moving towards redemption. Is moving in a positive direction. And I wanted to explain this by reference to two terms. We speak about the spiritual and we speak about the material. Now, Maimonides, the Rambam, talks about the times of Mashiach. He says that there will be material abundance. That there will be no hunger. There will be every people will have all that they need, but in material terms. And he also speaks about the idea of course, and this is maybe even more important, that the world will be filled with the knowledge of Hashem, that it will be the occupation of all humanity to know Hashem. In other words, the knowledge of Hashem will fill the whole world. Now, so that's the spiritual and the material. In other words, we will be released from need, from scarcity, and we will also have we will also be spiritually developed. We will also, and people will live, their lives will be ethical. They will contemplate God. There will be peace in the world, and so on. Now, I would like to suggest also that there's a further dimension. We speak about the spiritual and the material, but maybe we can say further than this, that people will see godliness in the material world too. In other words, they'll see that Hashem in the world, in our material doings, in our material workings. They'll see how Hashem is sustaining us, how Hashem is enlivening everything, and so on. But I would like to develop the idea that to develop the concept of how these two dimensions of the spiritual and the material go together throughout history. Now, one thing is that one thing that is brought down in Torah is that the creation is being moved in a direction of ever greater ascent, spiritually speaking. Now, that may sound strange to us, because if we look around, we don't see that necessarily. There are lots of negative developments in the world. There is still violence. There is still immorality. There is confusion, and all of that. Nevertheless, there can be much darkness, and this darkness comes from confusion. It also comes from the fact that we haven't yet completely controlled the technology. The technology itself can be a source of darkness if it's not properly utilized. The internet can be a source of darkness if it's not properly utilized. Huge corporations, enormous corporations, can make our lives in some ways darker when they don't behave humanely. And in general, the more we become involved in the technical aspect of life, the harder it is sometimes to see the spiritual. Nevertheless, if we look over history, we do see that history in many ways is moving in broad terms towards greater spirituality. Now, where do we see that? But as I said, it's always going to be confronted with a challenge from the material world. And the reason for that is that the more we are engrossed in the material world, in physical things, the less we are involved in the spiritual. So there will always be a challenge for us it will always be a challenge for humanity to make the spiritual prevail over the material, to rule the material dimension. But I would like to point out that if we look through history, we do see on the one hand a progression, a spiritual progression, a spiritual development. So, for example, we see in what's called the classical epoch. Sometimes it's called the axial age. It's a period which goes from about 2,800 years, starting about 2,800 years ago. We find that the ancient idolatry is replaced increasingly by world religions which have some concept of deity. So that is already a stage towards greater spiritual awareness. And then in the Middle Ages, as Maimonides points out, you have the development of the spread of Christianity and Islam all around the world. And this also begins to take further, to extend further. First of all, it's a more transcendent view of godliness than the previous ones. The previous ones were more inner worldly. The Asian religions and so on were more inner worldly religions. Well, these Abrahamic religions, which then spread out throughout the whole world, they are taking the idea of a transcendent deity, and they're spreading it. They're spreading it all around. And then and then in the modern period, which you can call the Renaissance, or you can call it the Enlightenment, the European. I don't know what happened in the Asian world if you had such a phenomenon. I don't know that they did. But certainly in the European world, you had the Renaissance and then the Enlightenment. And this actually is also the development of a kind of Protestantism, and of course this was a time also when of even greater, Europe of influence, which went all around the world, the colonization of Asia and Africa, and so on and so forth. And there is, if you like, a further dissemination of, let us say, a kind of deistic, which is a sort of, a certain kind of a spirituality. You see it in the French, you see it in America, for example. The American Constitution speaks about what's known as a certain deism, which means sort of a neutral concept of deity. And then we come, and so then that's and then we come to the modern period. The modern period is a very ambiguous period, but I think we could say that that there is also a further extension of religious belief. Now, where we are right now, it doesn't look that way at all. Particularly in the West, it looks as if religion has been driven into a corner. But I trust that this is a temporary phenomenon, because that this actually will be altered. Now, but in the Torah tradition itself, you find that in each epoch, deeper and deeper levels of Torah are being revealed. So that, for example, in the classical period, you found that this was the Torah Sheba'al Peh. You find that it was the logical explanation of the laws of the Torah, or the explanation in a way which could be understood through the Talmud and the Mishnah. Then we come to the Middle Ages, and then we have Maimonides and Nachmanides, and they are expounding transcendent concepts of godliness. This is an even higher level than this. I mean, we're not saying that they're greater than the sages. They weren't, and the sages knew all of this, but they're expounding and they're disseminating higher, if you like, more transcendent concepts of deity. And then we go on to the times of the Renaissance and the Enlightenment, and we find that the Kabbalah is being disseminated. Today, for example, is the Yortzeit. It's the anniversary of the passing of the Arizal, who was the great modern disseminator of the Kabbalah. So this is the Kabbalah was known. I mean, the Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai already wrote the Zohar 2,000 years ago, more, but it was kept in secret. It was not disseminated widely. Not many people knew about it, but it became it became widely known already at the time of starting with Nachmanides, but particularly with the Arizal in the 1500s. And then we come also then to modernity, to late modernity, where we are now, and Hasidic philosophy, which contains many deep concepts of the Torah, is being spread out in a mass level. So what I'm saying is the Torah tradition is revealing and disseminating higher and higher levels of godliness. We're talking about this more. And this, in a way, also is going on in the outside world. Of course, it's not direct, they may not have the knowledge of what's happening in the Torah world, but there is a kind of, there is a, if you like, there are increasingly higher spiritual levels, even in the broader context of civilization. So that's the first point I want to make. But then I'll let you translate that first, Leo. Okay?
Oke, Rabi, no problem. Baik, Bapak Ibu sekalian, saya akan menerjemahkan apa yang tadi dijelaskan oleh Rabi. Rabi memulai bahwa minggu ini kita akan belajar, hari ini kita akan belajar terkait dengan pergerakan sejarah, ya. Dan sebagaimana kita tahu, dan buku-buku sejarah juga sudah menulis bahwa manusia dari mulai dulu peradaban yang kita kenal melalui bukti-bukti sejarah ataupun tulisan apapun, manusia itu selalu berusaha memperbaiki kualitas hidupnya, ya. Masyarakat dimanapun, di belahan bumi manapun, kalau kita lihat mereka sejarah mencatat senantiasa memperbaiki kualitas hidupnya. Dan sampai dengan sekarang kita lihat sudah banyak sekali teknologi yang ditemukan, ya. Pertanian saat ini tidak sama seperti pertanian 2000-3000 tahun yang lalu, gitu kan. Juga berbagai macam hal. Transportasi memang tidak sama sekali berbeda dengan zaman lalu. Zaman dulu ya bisa keluar kota aja sudah merupakan suatu yang luar biasa gitu. Sekarang kita mau kemana aja tinggal yang penting kita bisa beli tiket dan kita bisa kemana-mana ke seluruh dunia ini. Sudah sangat-sangat jauh berbeda sekali. Nah, tapi Nabi juga berkata dan mengingatkan pengajaran minggu lalu bahwa semakin manusia terlibat di dalam dunia itu semakin tenggelam, ya kan? Kesadaran akan Hashem itu boleh dikatakan menjadi semakin tertutup. Memang itu yang terjadi, dan itu memang kenyataan yang memang menjadi pola daripada dunia ini sampai nanti selesai, gitu ya, sampai nanti Masya dinyatakan. Nah, tetapi Bapak Ibu sekalian, secara tidak disadari bahwa sebenarnya secara keseluruhan umat manusia, walaupun memang kita lihat semakin teknologi semakin maju, semakin canggih, tapi kita juga lihat sekarang kegelapan juga, artinya kebingungan manusia itu juga semakin menjadi-jadi, gitu kan. Kita sudah sering bahas di dalam pengajaran kita sendiri, di dalam komunitas kita. Tapi sebetulnya secara keseluruhan umat manusia di dunia ini juga dibawa bergerak ke arah yang positif, Bapak Ibu sekalian, ya. Nah, nanti kita akan bahas, Rabi akan jelaskan terkait dengan hal itu, ya. Kenapa? Karena memang arah daripada dunia itu harus ke situ, ya, harus ke arah redemptif, ke arah penebusan, ke arah persiapan, sebagaimana yang semalam kita bahas, ke arah persiapan masuk kepada penebusan terakhir, masuk kepada kekekalan, Bapak Ibu sekalian. Dan itu harus terjadi dalam dua aspek. Sekali lagi, harus terjadi dalam dua aspek. Aspek material, ya, dan juga aspek spiritual, gitu, ya. Nah, Maimonides menjelaskan bahwa kalau secara material nanti ciri-cirinya itu adalah akan terjadi kelimpahan. Manusia udah nggak pusing lagi, gitu kan, tidak ada kelaparan, tidak ada lagi orang yang nggak bisa makan, gitu kan. Yang basic itu manusia udah nggak perlu pusing. Sekarang belum, tapi sedang menuju ke arah sana. Ya, bayangkan Bapak Ibu sekalian, kalau pertanian kita, kalau teknologi peternakan kita dan teknologi lainnya itu seperti 3000 tahun yang lalu dengan jumlah penduduk yang saat ini sudah mencapai 7 miliar lebih. pasti banyak kelaparan, ya kan? Tapi ternyata sekarang tidak. Nah, itu yang bisa kita lihat tuh. Dengan jumlah penduduk 7 miliar, kelaparan hanya terjadi mungkin hanya di beberapa tempat. Tidak masif gitu loh. Ya, tapi nanti ujungnya sama sekali tidak akan ada kekurangan. Itu yang dikatakan di dalam Taurat dan nanti akan terjadi. Kita akan menuju ke sana, Be'ezrat Hashem. Dan yang kedua terkait dengan aspek spiritualnya itu adalah bahwa dunia akan dipenuhi oleh pengetahuan akan Hashem yang benar, yaitu pengetahuan Taurat, Bapak Ibu sekalian, ya. Dan nanti di ujungnya, ketika semua ini sudah selesai gitu ya, dan saya yakin kalau saya sih mau mengambil bagian saat itu terjadi ya, bahwa saat itu nanti manusia itu akan bisa melihat Tuhan di dalam keseluruhan aspek yang walaupun material. Sekarang ini kita mungkin gampang sekali berkata, ini sih cuma piring, ini sih cuma benda mati, itu sih cuma seonggok kertas, itu cuma sebongkah batu. Kita anggap sepele, kita anggap tidak apa ya itu cuman ya memang begitu gitu kan. Nah, tapi nanti ke depannya kita bisa menghargai, kita bahkan bisa mengerti bahwa ada aspek Tuhan di situ dan kita bisa mengerti aspeknya. Jadi boleh dikatakan Bapak Ibu sekalian, kita minimalnya akan kembali seperti kemampuan Adam yang bisa mengerti esensi daripada segala macam ciptaan. Binatang ini esensinya apa, tumbuhan ini esensinya apa, sampai kepada benda-benda mati, sampai kepada benda-benda yang sekarang ini kita sepelekan. Nah, itu nanti keadaan di ujungnya itu seperti itu, Bapak Ibu sekalian. Nah, jadi secara keseluruhan sebetulnya kita itu sudah memang ada. Kalau kita lihat dari fenomena yang kita lihat memang sepertinya kekelaman menutupi, tapi secara umum dunia ini, umat manusia ini sedang menuju kepada peningkatan secara spiritual, ya. Dan secara historis kita bisa buktikan bahwa peningkatan itu terjadi, Bapak Ibu sekalian, ya. Nah, jadi Rabi membawa kita demikian kepada perkembangan sejarah. Ini perkembangan sejarah secara umum ya, bukan dalam dunia Taurat ya. Jadi perkembangan sejarah umat manusia ya. Di zaman klasik itu sekitar 2.800-3.000 tahun yang lalu, sekitar segitu Bapak Ibu sekalian ya. Kita bisa melihat di zaman itu kegiatan penyembahan berhala itu mulai digantikan dengan pemahaman terkait dengan adanya konsep Tuhan. Kalau dulu kan penyembahan berhala kan, kalau saya petani maka saya hanya membutuhkan kesuburan, maka dia menyembah dewa kesuburan, sudah itu aja gitu kan. Nah, tapi 2.800 tahun yang lalu sudah mulai muncul ada konsep yang namanya Tuhan yang mengatur keseluruhan, walaupun masih belum benar gitu loh, sudah mulai mengarah ke sana ya. Lalu di zaman di abad pertengahan itu mulai muncul juga, kita tahu dua agama besar dunia, yaitu Islam dan Kristen dan Islam, karena Kristen duluan gitu kan. Nah, di sini mereka membawa lebih lagi konsep terkait Tuhan, ya kan. Makanya sekarang kalau saya sih mengakui, saya dari latar belakang Kristen, saya lebih mudah memahami Taurat karena memiliki basis di situ. Karena bagaimanapun juga mereka juga menggunakan Taurat gitu kan. Jadi itu dipakai oleh Hashem, dan itu memang sebagaimana Maimonides katakan bahwa ya itu memang diizinkan oleh Hashem terjadi untuk membawa dunia kepada konsep yang memang secara spiritual, secara aspek spiritual itu arahnya ke situ. Konsepnya lebih lagi ada Tuhan yang transcendence, sudah mulai diperkenalkan monoteisme. Padahal sebetulnya konsep monoteisme itu sudah terjadi ketika atau sudah diajarkan oleh Abraham Avinu, bahkan sebelum Sinai, sebelum bangsa Israel terbentuk gitu kan. Nah, tetapi bisa tiba-tiba di abad pertengahan mulai ada orang-orang yang mulai tanda petik mulai mencoba menggali kembali, walaupun sebetulnya orang Yahudi masih ada saat itu kan, sudah ada ya kan, tapi mereka kan dipersekusi, kita semua tahu. Anyway, kita nggak akan bahas secara detail ke sana, tapi yang jelas fenomena besar yang terjadi di abad pertengahan adalah munculnya dua agama besar ya, dua kepercayaan besar di dunia. Masuk kepada zaman Renaissance ya. Zaman Renaissance itu adalah zaman di mana ilmu pengetahuan di Eropa terutama ya mulai berkembang segala macam, sehingga menjadikan Eropa menjadi negara kolonial ya. Dan kita tahu juga Eropa ketika dia menaklukkan berbagai negara di belahan Asia dan Afrika, ya mereka juga membawa apa yang mereka percayai, yaitu konsep Tuhan menurut versinya mereka. Ya kan? Dan bagaimana juga sampai kepercayaan saya yang dahulu ada di Indonesia, itu kan juga gara-gara orang Eropa. Ya kan? Nah, jadi itu semua tersebar, dan itu memang Rabi berkata bahwa itu memang Hashem izinkan untuk mempersiapkan dunia ini masuk kepada proses penebusan nanti di ujungnya. Oke? Itu zaman Renaissance. Nah, lalu zaman modern, ya. Zaman modern itu di mana kita hidup sekarang. Mungkin kita kelihatannya chaos, mungkin kelihatannya kacau beliau. Tapi Rabi percaya kayak misalkan konsep LGBT apa segala macam seperti itu yang akhirnya melanda dan membuat pusing orang-orang para orang tua di Eropa dan di negara belahan barat lainnya. Tapi Rabi percaya itu hanya fenomena sementara. Nanti pasti akan kembali kepada konsep yang benar, gitu loh, seperti itu, ya. Nah, itu secara histori, secara perkembangan sejarah secara umum. Nah, di dalam Taurat juga terjadi hal yang sama, ya. Di dalam periode klasik itu yang di dalam dunia Taurat, yaitu di dalam bangsa Israel, yang terjadi adalah Torah Sheba Alpeh. Mulai dijelaskan, mulai lagi ini tuh maksudnya begini, perintah Tuhan yang di sini tuh maksudnya begini, di dalam Taurat, di dalam orang Yahudi, ya. Dan di situ ditandai dengan selesainya Mishnah dan juga diredaksikannya adalah Talmud, ya. Itu di zaman klasik. Lalu masuk ke abad pertengahan, ada Maimonides, ada Nachmanides, sama juga Bapak Ibu sekalian, mulai dijelaskan lebih lagi konsep-konsepnya. Bahkan Maimonides kan bahkan juga sampai berkata bahwa Torah ini mulai mengeluarkan, juga mulai mengajarkan, mulai memberikan pemahaman bahwa Taurat ini juga ada bagian dari bangsa-bangsa loh, ya kan. Dan hukum Nuh kita itu semuanya bersumber daripada pengajaran Maimonides, ada di situ semua Bapak Ibu sekalian. Masuk kepada zaman Renaissance itu mulai dibuka Kabalah. Ya, Kabalah itu sendiri di pelopor yang di abad modernnya itu adalah Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, Rashbi, gitu ya. Dia yang mulai membuat Kabalah itu menjadi mudah dimengerti dan mulai menyalakan apinya. Karena zaman dulu benar-benar orang itu hanya satu one on one Bapak Ibu sekalian. Bahkan di dalam orang Yahudi, ya. Tapi semenjak Rashbi itu mulai lebih besar. Nah, tapi itu bukan di abad Renaissance, tapi itu di abad-abad sebelumnya, di abad pertengahan. Nah, di abad pertengahan, di abad Renaissance ada yang namanya Arizal, muridnya daripada siapa namanya Rashbi ini. Dia mulai menuliskan Zohar segala macam, lalu mengajarkan dengan lebih luas lagi. Masuk ke abad modern, ada yang namanya pengajaran Hasidik, ya, lebih hikmat yang lebih applicable lagi, yang beberapa piece-piece-nya itu saya juga jelaskan kepada Bapak Ibu sekalian, dan itu adalah hikmat Taurat yang luar biasa, yang buat saya ketika saya belajar Hasidik, wah itu luar biasa banget. Saya mengerti bahwa Torah itu bukan hanya sekedar cerita, saya mengerti kenapa begini, kenapa begitu, sama dengan Bapak Ibu sekalian, kan? Nah, itulah yang terjadi Bapak Ibu sekalian. Jadi dunia secara keseluruhan itu masuk kepada pergerakan yang positif. Walaupun kita lihat sebetulnya yang kita lihat dengan mata fisik, mata jasmani, itu terjadi adalah kekelaman dan kekacauan, ya. Tapi sebetulnya secara hakikat sedang dibawa ke sana tanpa sadar. Seperti itu, Bapak Ibu sekalian.
Okay.
Yeah.
Ready? Thanks very much indeed. Now, just the interesting thing here is, though, just as we find an ascending trend like that in spiritual terms, we also find that there is a challenge from the other side, so to speak, from the realm which is not the realm of holiness, and and at every single stage, so to speak, there is an opposite. There is an opposite response, which very often tends to assert the material over the spiritual, or the worldly involvement over the spiritual dimension. So we see this already in the beginnings of the beginning of the Middle Ages, that there is a science develops. Now, science at the same time, it's something which can be separated from spirituality. In the classical epoch, it was all the same. It's all one. There's no other way to look at the world than in religious terms. But already in the Middle Ages, you find that science becomes somewhat independent, and the world, the involvement in the world becomes somewhat independent of spirituality. It's obviously it's not totally independent because it's generally speaking a religious time, and so there are already 10 trends there. There are already trends there which are moving, if you like, the view of the world somewhat away from the spiritual. And this becomes particularly strong also in the time of the Renaissance and the Enlightenment, where you have the growth of modern science, and in many places, the idea of the replacement of the divine, so to speak, by simply understanding that the world is all about just a relationship between the human being and nature. In other words, there becomes a preoccupation in some areas with science for its own sake, or science for the sake of human domination. In other words, and to that extent also, the spiritual is somewhat eclipsed. In other words, you find an opposite phenomenon occurring at the same time. And so that on the one hand, we have ever higher spiritual levels certainly within Torah, and to some extent, and to importance also in the world. But there is a counterforce. There is a trend towards idolatry, seeing the world as a material, just as a material existence. And then when we come into the modern phase, the time which we live in right now, well, at the same time as we have this dissemination of Hasidic philosophy, and you find exactly the opposite going on. In other words, total self-absorption, hedonism, the notion of the rejection of the rejection of the spiritual in favor of a completely worldly existence. So paradoxically, you also have a phenomenon of decline. Spiritually, we're in one sense, inwardly, we're going up, but outwardly, the world is becoming externally, at least externally, a less spiritual place. It's a contradiction in some ways. So the task becomes essentially the whole thing is about the relationship between the spiritual and the worldly, and the Torah perspective, and also the civilized perspective, that which is civilized, that which represents the civilized core, the core of values which are oriented towards God. That is one stream. And on the other hand, you find that there is pulling against that a tendency also to make the world independent of God, to make science independent of God, and so on and so forth. So this is a tension which goes through. In other words, is the world becoming better, or is the world becoming worse? Inwardly, it's becoming better. It's becoming strong. The core, the spiritual core, is becoming stronger and purer and more powerful. Outwardly, we see sometimes the very opposite. And just like in the time in the West, in the present time, there's tremendous ignorance of religion compared to the time when I was a child. There's been a tremendous decline. So we could call this actually modern idolatry, and so basically what we have then is a conflict and a tension between the spiritual core, which is moving up, and the external darkness, so to speak, which is due to the fact that there are doctrines and there are worldviews which are working in the opposite direction to make the spiritual subordinate to the material and to actually to eliminate the spiritual altogether. So what is going to prevail? Well, Hashem tells us that the spiritual is going to prevail. Why is the spiritual going to prevail? So the answer to that is, I mean, I can speak about this in a Jewish respect and in a Noahide respect. And the answer in the Jewish respect is that the human is that one thing that Hashem does is that Hashem moves us towards teshuvah, towards the idea of improving ourselves, of coming back to ourselves, because the core of a Jew is a soul, and the core of a Noahide, of a human being, is the Tselem Elokim, is the divine likeness. And because this is implanted within us, Hashem, so to speak, moves things in such a way as that this returns, this comes back, and this comes to assert itself. It's a very interesting idea. As a matter, if we look at our own lives, as we get older, we get, in a way, and so long as we're trying, so long as we're not, we don't give ourselves over to indulgence, we improve because experience teaches, brings us closer to our innermost self. We learn lessons. We learn from the mistakes that we've made. We see what doesn't work. We see what fails. And so it is also with civilization. Civilization sees what is false, what leads to barbaric results. And in the West, we have this right now. We have now what's called a pushback after this whole gender ideology where things have gone absolutely mad, crazy. People don't know identities. Now people are returning because there is something in the human makeup which sees that it's mad, which sees that it's false. So the good news is that Hashem has a way of helping us come back to our own essence, coming back to and that essence, in a Noahide sense, is the divine image within the human being. We come back to it. We are forced, so to speak, to see that this is the right thing, and that the other is wrong. Just like civilization has lived through horrors. It lived through Nazism. It lived through Stalinism, through communism and fascism, and it saw that these were aberrational. And these episodes are seen as aberrations, as wrong turns, just like a human being in his or her own life says, oh yes, I made a wrong turn. That was a mistake. That was an error. So civilization, and we have also in civilization the idea that we return to what is right. We come back to what is right. We are helped, so to speak, to see what the right thing is. So whilst going through history, I can see plenty of cases. I can see that over as time goes on, more mistakes are made, but that doesn't prevent us from learning from and taking the best of the cumulative development and carrying that forward, so that people will see, for example, take the internet. The internet, for example, has a potential for evil, and it has a potential for holiness. So Hashem is going to, because ultimately everything is in Hashem's hands. It is impossible that even through the exercise of human choice, that we could derail Hashem's intention. We cannot dislodge Hashem's intention for the creation. So he will find ways that the human being themselves will come back to their senses, so to speak, to their spiritual core. It's a very important thing to know. If we say that Hashem is the soul, is the author of creation, and Hashem enlivens everything, it is impossible that anything should be beyond Hashem's control. And Hashem may allow us temporarily to choose bad things and for civilization to choose bad things. But it is part of Hashem's plan that he has ways to make civilization come back to itself, to its own spiritual core and moral compass. So even though things look as if sometimes they're getting worse, and throughout history you could say, yes, in many ways we had more challenges. As time goes on, as the generations roll on, there are more and more challenges to the manifestation of godliness in the world. That's true, but at the same time, Hashem has a way of salvaging the potentials so that the potentials are kept and they're held, and the net result is that what comes through is a good thing. The bad things fall away, and goodness is cumulative. Badness is not. Evil is not cumulative. It doesn't add up. It doesn't project. Nothing builds on evil, but good builds on good, and so that the civilizational core stays and is continued and develops onward. So basically, in a nutshell, what we have is that at every historical juncture, we have the possibility that the world, science, technology, materiality will be used for good, or it will be used, and in other words, it will be made instrumental to the godly life, or the opposite. That can happen. The opposite is idolatry. And there's a middle ground too, which is sort of, kind of partnership, if you like. But at the same time, history is something which is ultimately moved towards the good, and that is divine providence. And divine providence can influence not just our material situation, but can ultimately influence our spiritual choices. Because even though we have freedom to choose, Hashem can help us move towards teshuvah. Hashem can help as a way of nudging the person. That's why we have difficulty as well. That's why bad things happen to us, to make us do teshuvah. It's to bring us back, and so on and so forth, so that we will choose in accordance with what Hashem wants, and bring everything and make the good choices and utilize the world in the right way. So, okay, I'll be back in a minute. I'm just going to come back.
Okay, Rabbi, I'll translate that. Jadi Bapak Ibu sekalian, di bagian yang kedua ini kita lihat bahwa sebetulnya tadi kan di bagian pertama Rabbi berkata bahwa secara keseluruhan, secara inti itu peradaban manusia itu sudah menuju kepada hal yang baik. Tapi yang kelihatan dari kita itu kan ini kayaknya makin kacau gitu ya. Nah, jadi memang sebetulnya itu ada tension. Memang sebenarnya itu ada seperti pertentangan, dan memang itu terjadi gitu Bapak Ibu sekalian. Dan Hashem memang izinkan tersebut, dan titik awal daripada hal itu tadi Rabbi jelaskan itu di sekitar abad pertengahan, di mana ilmu pengetahuan itu mulai berkembang gitu kan. Ini buat dunia gitu ya, bukan sekedar buat Israel. Nah, ini ketika kita ngomong abad pertengahan ini, kita lagi ngomong sejarah dunia secara umum, bukan Israel, karena saat itu Israel benar-benar dalam tanda petik terisolasi gitu kan ya, dibenci oleh semua orang, dipersekusi oleh semua orang, sehingga boleh dikatakan ya dalam tanda petik dia punya dunia terpisah gitu. Nah, tetapi di dunia di luar daripada Taurat, di luar daripada bangsa Israel ya, yang dikucilkan saat itu, sampai sekarang juga masih sedikit-sedikit gitu ya, dan kita nanti akan lihat akan berubah. Nah, di dunia keseluruhan kita semua tahu bahwa justru saat itu yang pegang peranan itu adalah para kaum religius gitu kan, orang-orang yang pegang agama gitu kan, dan itu menjadi sesuatu yang menjadi salah satu alat untuk melanggengkan kekuasaan. Nah, ketika ilmu pengetahuan mulai muncul, di situ mulai ada orang berkata, bukan pendapatmu saja yang benar, aku bisa buktikan loh dengan hal seperti ini. Nah, itu mulai terjadi pemisahan tuh Bapak Ibu sekalian. Awal-awalnya kita juga tahu dari sejarah bahwa para ilmuwan banyak yang dipersekusi oleh para pemuka agama di Eropa saat itu, ya kan? Ada yang dipancung karena berkatanya berbeda lah apa segala macam. Kita semua tahu sejarahnya, ya. Tapi itu di situ cikal bakalnya tuh itu mulai gitu. Nah, pada hakikatnya sebetulnya ilmu pengetahuan itu seharusnya itu bekerja dan bersama dengan dengan pemahaman spiritual. Tapi memang saat ini belum terjadi demikian, gitu Bapak Ibu sekalian. Ya mungkin karena latar belakang tadi seperti yang dijelaskan oleh Rabi. Maka para ilmuwan itu cenderung berkata bahwa wah ini mah justru mengambil mengambil konsep yang negatifnya gitu, karena berarti ini nggak ada Tuhan nih, bohong nih, karena dia percaya bahwa si para pemuka agama yang di Eropa saat itu mewakili Tuhan, mereka percaya, padahal mereka enggak gitu kan, mereka juga ngawur gitu kan. Jadi para ilmuwan yang bekerja secara full di dalam ilmu pengetahuan itu berkata bahwa wah justru ini aku malah membuktikannya lain, maka Tuhan tidak ada. Kesimpulannya itu begitu ya. Nah, jadi memang tadi Rabi juga berkata bahwa justru hal ini memang memunculkan sebuah penyembahan berhala baru, ya kan, yaitu menganggap dunia itu tidak ada yang mengatur, dunia itu adalah bukan ciptaan, tidak ada pencipta, jadi cuma sekedar material begitu saja. Itu juga bentuk penyembahan berhala, Bapak Ibu sekalian, ya. Tapi anyway, itu yang terjadi. Walaupun demikian, tadi Nabi berkata, secara esensi di dalam, secara intinya di dalam, dunia itu sudah mengarah kepada tujuan yang benar, yaitu kepada penebusan terakhir. Di luarnya, yang terjadi adalah terbaliknya, kekacauan, kebingungan, seperti itu Bapak Ibu sekalian. Nah, tapi tidak perlu khawatir. Nabi berkata bahwa sebagaimana Hashem mengerti manusia, menciptakan manusia, yaitu bahwa manusia itu diciptakan selem Elohim, sesuai dengan selemnya Elohim, sesuai dengan blueprintnya Hashem, sesuai dengan seperti itu. Maka pasti itu manusia itu nanti akan kembali kepada hakikatnya. Dan Hashem menggunakan kekuatannya, menggunakan kekuasaannya untuk mengarahkan dengan berbagai macam hal yang perlu terjadi, baik itu hal yang baik ataupun hal yang negatif. Itu boleh dikatakan manusia itu seperti dijepit gitu ya, nudge gitu ya, dipojokkan, sehingga pilihannya tidak ada yang lain, hanya bertobat, teshuva gitu loh. Ya, Baruch Hashem, kita semua di sini nggak perlu kejepit, nggak perlu ke pojok, kita sudah teshuva, kita sudah kembali kepada Taurat. Tapi ada orang-orang tertentu yang memang harus demikian, ya itu biarkanlah, itu memang caranya demikian. Hashem menggunakan cara yang demikian, ya. Sama seperti kita juga Bapak Ibu sekalian, semakin manusia itu semakin tua, kalau manusia itu normal ya, manusia itu seharusnya makin bisa belajar dari pengalaman. Ya kan? Oh, zaman dulu ketika saya muda, saya sembrono. Saya memutuskan secara serampangan, begini. Dan hasilnya berantakan. Lalu semakin bertambahnya usia, kita bisa belajar. Ketika dihadapkan kembali kepada situasi yang demikian, kita harus memutuskannya dengan berbeda. Gitu kan? Itulah teshuva. Seperti itu Bapak Ibu sekalian. Demikian juga dengan umat manusia, perjalanan umat manusia. Pernah terjadi yang namanya kekejaman, fasisme, nazisme, lalu apalagi komunisme dengan berbagai macam bentuk kengeriannya, ya. Itu sebetulnya adalah yaitu tadi sama seperti manusia individu yang salah mengambil keputusan. Tapi setelah sadar, dia akan kembali memutuskan dengan berbeda. Dia tidak akan mengulangi kesalahannya. Demikian juga umat manusia. Oh, sudah tahu fasisme itu mengerikan, maka pasti akan ditinggalkan. Oh, sudah tahu komunisme itu juga mengerikan juga, walaupun kelihatannya bagus, nanti pasti akan ditinggalkan dan terus berjalan menuju kepada ending yang sesuai dengan Hashem inginkan. Nah, ditambah lagi dengan campur tangan divine providence, campur tangan daripada Hashem. Hashem akan menggunakan berbagai macam cara, berbagai macam semua yang ada di dalam kekuatannya, pasti karena semua itu tidak ada yang lain, hanya oleh karena Hashem, dia akan gunakan itu untuk membawa manusia, kan kalaupun sampai pada ujungnya harus dijepit di pojokan, Hashem akan lakukan itu demi apa? Demi manusia dan keseluruhan umat manusia kembali kepada hakikatnya, yaitu adalah Selem Elohim. Seperti itu Bapak Ibu sekalian. Over to you, Rabbi.
So basically, I would like, maybe there's some questions now or some comments about this or anything that anybody else would like to talk about.
Baik, Bapak Ibu sekalian, ada pertanyaan atau ada komen? Mungkin saya bisa bacakan ini. There's a comment, maybe you can also read from the chat, Rabbi.
I read it.
So,
I think it's a very good comment. I like the
yeah,
comment. Thank you for that.
definitely. Jadi I'll just translate the comment for the Indonesian folks. Jadi menurut saudara Ferdi, brother Ferdi, saudara kita yang ada di US ini, mulai sudah terjadi apa namanya perlawanan balik terhadap woke culture. Woke culture itu tadi Bapak Ibu sekalian, gender identity gitu ya, yang LGBT, yang anak kecil boleh menentukan kelaminnya sendiri, bahkan orang tuanya kalau menolak bisa dipenjara, hal seperti itu. Sudah mulai larangan berdoa di sekolah sudah mulai dikembalikan, sudah mulai ada yang menentang, ada yang mulai memberontak. Ya, orang-orang Kristen nggak apa-apa, no problem. Anyway, mereka eventually akan dibawa juga ke arah yang lebih benar gitu kan. Jadi baru Hashem sudah mulai ada perubahan. Silakan Bapak Ibu sekalian, ada lagi yang ingin ditambahkan atau mungkin ingin ditanyakan terkait dengan Shiur kita hari ini atau topik lain juga nggak apa-apa. Ayo, silakan. Ada?
Rabbi, I want to ask something.
Yes.
So you mentioned earlier that we have to respect older people. If the older person has terrible attitude and is very wicked, do we still respect that person? I mean, parents are different thing because the Torah specifically mentioned about that. But how about relatives and strangers, like someone that we didn't even know?
Well, it's a good point. It's true that if a person can become old and can also develop very bad character traits. I agree with that.
Right.
However, the position of Torah is that if so long as we know that the human being is not wicked or evil, something like that, you can assume, I think, that an ordinary person has learnt a lot from life. It doesn't mean we have to agree with everything that the person says. A person may be misguided in some respects, but the person has surely has been through a lot, has learnt from life's experience, and that alone deserves respect. I mean, look at all of us. I'm sure all of us have had difficult times in our lives, and the very fact that we come through it and we deal with it, and so long as we deal with it in a proper way, we don't deal with it destructively or anything of that sort, that itself deserves some respect. And I think that what it says is that if a person is basically well-oriented, then I think what happens is that a person actually hopefully grows in humility as they get older. I hope, maybe I'm wrong. I don't. Maybe there may be exceptions. Some don't, but in general, in general, it's interesting that we speak about a historical development, and the historical development is that, as I mentioned before, is that Hashem helps throughout history, at least the spiritual side, to become more refined, to become more focused, to reach higher levels, and so on and so forth. And in a way, I think we can say that a human being who is a decent human being, you know, obviously there are not, will also become more spiritual as they get older. That it says, first of all, the physical dimension, the physical aspect of a person's life becomes weaker, and therefore the spiritual naturally prevails over it more. But you know, it's not, I mean, it's not necessarily so. But if an older person has bad attitudes, well, obviously we don't have to endorse those bad attitudes. But it could be that still we could respect the fact that they've been through a lot. After all, you know, in a bus, crowded bus, we stand up for an old person, right? Why? Yeah. We didn't ask them. We didn't ask them for a CV. We didn't ask. We didn't see. We want to know what you've done in your life. The very fact that there's an old person standing there, well, I mean, they're physically weaker, but also they've been through a lot. The assumption is that they have learned certain things from life. That's all I would say. But I agree, you don't have to respect the bad attitude of a person, but still respect at least what life has taught them.
Baruch Hashem. Oke, Bro Ferdi.
Yes, thank you, Rabbi. Anyway,
Baruch
about the fasting, there's one day that it happened to me. I stood up for a lady, and she said, like, "Are you assuming I'm weak?" And obviously, they are the alphabet community, so
She didn't want. She was insulted. She didn't want it.
yeah, she felt insulted because she thought I'm assuming she's a woman.
Well, I don't know what to say. Maybe. I don't know how old is she. If she was really old, she might appreciate it. I don't know.
I think she's around her 40s, but it's in New York, so it can happen. In Texas, it could be a different story because they are very conservative.
Yeah,
Just
anyway, you could
take
say
your seat, brother.
you're willing to stand up for an old man as well, not just an old woman.
Yeah.
100%.
Okay, good. Well,
Okay, Rabbi, one more question.
Oh,
Sorry,
yes, good. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
okay. Go ahead.
one more question. Certainly,
Yes.
it's related about the Jewish law and also subsequently to the Noahide. So the
Yes.
question is like this: according to is it true? First, is it true according to the Jewish law that if the a woman is divorced by the husband, okay, and a divorced woman then remarried with another man, that man considered as adulterer? Is that true? That's number one.
Just a minute. Hang on. 1 minute. Say that again there. I didn't understand that.
Okay,
Say it
the
again.
situation is there's a husband and wife, right? And then they are divorced. The husband
Yes.
divorced the wife. So the wife is then remarried with another man.
Yes.
Is this man considered as an adulterer in the Jewish law? The man who
Definitely
married
no.
the man
Not
who
at all.
married
Why-
the divorce.
Definitely not.
Okay.
No, certainly not.
Okay.
It's
So
just
for Noahide also, is it allowed? Then the next question would be: is it allowed for a man to marry a divorced woman?
certainly no question whatsoever. No problem. No certainly. No question.
Okay.
Not a problem.
Okay.
Not a problem at all. I mean, look, divorces happen sometimes for reasons. So it's not always a person's fault that they're divorced. I mean,
Yeah.
We try. It's a sad thing, and we don't. Obviously, we want to make marriages work. That's number one. But if for some reason a marriage fails, then there's no reason why the both of them cannot remarry. It's not an issue.
Correct. Adultery is basically if a woman still technically married to the husband but have another relationship with
That's
another
correct.
man.
That is
correct,
right.
Rabbi?
That is correct. That's correct.
Exactly.
Yes, that is what
And that's also applied to a Noahide. Am I correct?
correct. That's correct.
Yeah.
That's
Okay.
correct.
Clear. Very
Okay.
clear.
All right.
Toda,
Thank
Rabbi.
you. We'll see you next week, please God. Okay.
Baruch Hashem. Shalom. Later
All the
on.
very best. Bye-bye.
Shavuot Tov, Rabbi.
Shalom,
Toda,
Rabbi. Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you,
Oh,
Rabbi.
See you,
Shalom,
Rabbi.
Rabbi. Rob.
Saya
Thank you,
terjemahkan
Rabbi.
pertanyaan yang terakhir ya dari Pak Yuri. Saya juga nggak tahu ini. Saya kaget ketika baca juga karena sepemahaman saya, walaupun saya nggak ngerti terlalu detail sampai peritil-peritilan hukum Yahudi, tapi secara basic yang seperti ini, kalau seorang wanita yang sudah bercerai, beneran bercerai ya, artinya bukan pura-pura bercerai gitu ya, memang benar-benar bercerai, lalu dia menikah lagi dengan laki-laki lainnya, tidak ada masalah. Nggak masalah sama sekali selama benar-benar bercerai, laki-laki dan perempuannya itu bercerai. Masalah yang menceraikannya itu laki-lakinya, yaitu urusan lain gitu kan. Artinya laki-lakinya nggak suka, nggak setuju apa segala macam ya, terkait siapapun yang menceraikan, selama diceraikan dengan benar, artinya memang dua pihak itu sepakat untuk berpisah, sepakat untuk bercerai, ya sudah, yang laki-laki silakan menikah lagi kalau mau menikah, yang perempuan silakan menikah lagi kalau mau menikah. Maka dari itu justru surat cerai itu penting di dalam hukum Yahudi dan bagi kita Noahide. Agar apa? Agar jelas statusnya, ya kan? Sehingga nggak ada keabu-abuan. Cerai apa enggak ya? Ini gimana nih? Masih jadi suami orang, masih jadi istri orang atau enggak ini gitu? Enggak boleh. Harus ada kejelasan. Makanya mendingan kalau udah nggak cocok ya selesai gitu kan. Tapi seharusnya itu bukan berarti alasan untuk akhirnya kawin cerai, tidak lah ya. Ini kalau memang udah mentok, udah nggak ada bisa di apa namanya, tidak bisa diitukan lagi seperti itu ya. Nah, si perempuan juga apa namanya, ya silakan aja menikah dengan yang lain, nggak ada masalah. Dan laki-laki, tadi Rabi juga mengatakan bahwa laki-laki yang menikahi perempuan yang sudah bercerai bukan termasuk dengan perzinahan, kecuali cerainya cuma sekedar oh iya saya udah cerai, tapi sebenarnya enggak, gitu kan, cuma sekedar ngomong doang tapi kenyataannya enggak. Si suami masih nganggap enggak kok, kita nggak pernah cerai. Nah, itu baru berzina, Bapak Ibu sekalian ya. Jadi di sini harus jelas, dan bukan hukum Yahudi, nggak ada hukum Yahudi yang begitu. Yang ada adalah imam itu tidak boleh menikahi perempuan yang sudah bercerai. Imam, Bapak Ibu sekalian, Cowen, nah itu baru, itu ada tuh hukumnya, dituliskan di dalam Taurat pula gitu ya. Kalau bukan imam ya nggak apa-apa. Lagian kata tadi Rabi berkata bahwa kalau memang nggak cocok, kenapa sih gitu kan, itu something yang apa ya, nggak perlu dipaksakan gitu, something yang nggak, kalau memang udah sangat mengerikan sekali keadaan rumah tangganya ya, apa yang perlu dipertahankan gitu kan, apalagi sampai mengancam keselamatan nyawa, keselamatan jiwa gitu kan, ya itu mengerikan gitu. Dan nggak adil dan nggak fair kalau ternyata yang diceraikan perempuannya terus nggak boleh menikah lagi. Hello, salah itunya apa gitu kan. Justru kalau emang itu terjadi, itu mengerikan gitu ya. Artinya mendiskriminasikan pihak perempuan gitu kan. Siapa tahu yang salah sebetulnya laki-lakinya, tapi dia tiba-tiba menceraikan gitu kan. Terus kamu nggak boleh menikah lagi, kalau kamu menikah lagi maka kamu berzina lah. Itu namanya hukum dibuat sendiri gitu ya. Yang jelas tadi Nabi sudah menjelaskan, sudah mengatakan bahwa itu bukan hukum Yahudi. Dalam hukum Yahudi pun juga silakan saja orang yang bercerai mau menikah lagi, selama jelas memang sudah benar-benar bercerai, ya ada bukti otentiknya, silakan aja gitu ya. Dan saya juga melihat orang-orang Yahudi juga ada yang istilahnya sudah bercerai terus menikah lagi, no problem, nggak ada masalah, masih muda, mungkin dia nggak cocok dengan pasangan yang ini, sudah dicoba bertahun-tahun, tetap tidak bisa cocok ya, seperti saya bilang berkali-kali, sulit gitu kan, hubungannya itu menjadi sulit sekali gitu ya. Ya sudah, bercerailah secara baik-baik, lalu cari lagi pasangan yang lain secara baik-baik juga. Itulah manusia, itulah kehidupan gitu loh ya. Tidak ada yang jelimet, jangan dibuat menjelimet. Oke, Baruch Hashem, itu jawaban dari Rabi sudah jelas, dan semoga tidak ada lagi kebingungan di sini. Baruch Hashem. Baik, Bapak Ibu sekalian, terima kasih sudah bersama dengan kami. Terima kasih juga Bung Ferdi yang jauh-jauh sudah bergabung dari New York dan juga memberikan insight-insight yang cukup baik, yaitu apa namanya, terkait dengan apa yang terjadi di sana, memberikan secercah harapan, setidaknya manusia ini tidak bablas gitu ya. Walaupun kita tahu di negara bagian barat itu sudah mulai ngawur gitu ya, tapi setidaknya sekarang sudah mulai ada turning point atau teshuva, kembali balik kepada ke arah yang lebih benar. Baruch Hashem. Terima kasih juga buat Bapak Ibu sekalian semua, komunitas Benih Noah Indonesia, dan yang juga mendengarkan melalui YouTube, channel YouTube juga terima kasih. Semoga diskusi Taurat kita, pembelajaran Taurat kita bisa bermanfaat dan tentunya akan membuat hidup kita semakin lebih baik hari demi hari, dan bersama-sama dengan umat manusia menuju ke arah yang lebih baik, yaitu penebusan terakhir. Baruch Hashem. Terima kasih Bapak Ibu sekalian. Silakan kembali kepada aktivitas. Salam untuk keluarga. Shalom Aleichem. Shalom.
Baruch Hashem, Baruch Hashem.
Hashem.